Good morning. It's Pop here again, Dennis Murray. Um, so today is Popcast 50, and it's a recap of Popcasts 23 to 48, the second day of that part two. So the where we left off yesterday was oh, I'm sorry, I want to talk about my shirt first. Um, you remember the first two podcasts? I wore the same shirt for 2 days, and my daughter was really ragging on me about it. As you know, my if my wife were still living here with me instead of being in her memory care home nearby, she would never have allowed me to make such a serious social error as that. The shirt didn't even have a collar. She would have strongly encouraged me not to wear it in the first place, much less 2 days in a row. So, because of that funny faux pas on my part that began this whole thing, I've kind of been making a joke about shirts ever since. And so today I'm wearing a shirt that has symbols on it because uh, our entire modern lives uh, are only possible because our ancestor species learned how to be able to use symbolic communication. And so symbols are kind of the key to our being a gift to each other. Um, we are only able to be a gift to each other because of evolutionary changes in our ancestors that are focused around symbol use. So this shirt has Egyptian symbols on it, and I bought it because I had the good fortune to go to Egypt 15 years ago, and I had a fabulous tour group leader who was extremely knowledgeable, and this big symbol here in the center is the Eye of Horus. As you can see, here's an eyeball and an eyebrow. And he's also seen as a winged god. The Eye of Horus, flies around looking to make sure people are behaving as they're supposed to. And there is a social aspect to our individual choices. Um, and so, in effect, the community has something to lose if we make individual choices that harm the society, that don't honor the commitments that the society needs all of us to make and to live in order to thrive, to be a gift to each other. That's the secret to our thriving. And if we fail to be a gift to each other, if we then we harm society. We harm the thriving of all of us. And so we all have something to lose. And it's part of what's going on in our modern divide, that part of the part of your personal behavior that has a social significance, um, that involves things that everyone has something to lose if you fail to honor uh, your social commitments. That part has largely been lost. We've been focusing on ourselves as individuals for some centuries now, and our individualism has become overly asserted. But deep inside people, there's still this persistence of something that is valid and true and ancient, and it is that there is a social dimension to personal behavior, and that we only thrive because the majority of us honor the social dimension and in our personal choices. And so we have a group of people on the one hand asserting essentially individualism and the right to do what you want, and on the other hand we have a certain regard that sexual behavior in particular has community standards attached to it, and they need to be honored and not ignored or flaunted. Um, so it's not always easy to see how things from ancient times relate to modern divisiveness, but this one is there to see once it's drawn to your attention, and it's a significant aspect. Um, anyway, symbols, I'll just point out that on the wall behind me, there's another symbol, a small statue of a god from Egypt. This fellow up here, why isn't it showing up? This guy up here, this tall guy in a skirt. He's an Egyptian god. His name is Thoth. And he's got in his hand a stylus, a little stick, and a block with has a soft clay on it. And he's writing in clay. And when the clay gets hard, the writing becomes fixed. And so he's identified as the god of wisdom because wisdom and writing were linked in mythological conception. But so symbols, gods, still very much ancient things that are part of the gift of the past to the present, and this idea that there is something for the community to lose if you fail to keep the commitments that you've made to the community, and if we've failed to teach you that certain commitments need to be made to the community and they need to be honored, otherwise the community suffers great harm, and that's a big part of our modern arguments. It's just that we haven't brought it out exactly in that way, so that it isn't as well presented as it could on both sides. And I mean, if you had been brought up on individualism, you might begin to respect community commitments and think of your own behavior in somewhat different terms. And if you find yourself angry about other people's behavior as somehow offending your sense of how people should behave, and start to see that in terms of our evolved notions of commitment to the community. So it's not just your opinion or your particular religion, but the whole sociality that we have as humans, that is what has brought us to this enormous thriving, then your position becomes somewhat changed and greatly strengthened. It stops being a personal opinion and takes on the robe of important community benefits that can be lost by other people's individual behavior in violation of those benefits. And it gives you a higher right and explains to the other more of the legitimacy of your concern. All this stuff about values originates from symbols and is deeply buried in us and is hard to sort out, and is very closely related to the big divide of modern times. So that learning more about symbols and values and sorting them out, talking about them, how they were in ancient times, and how what parts of them still need to be honored today, is a useful response to our great divide and to trying to recreate the middle. So I'm wearing this shirt with symbols on it. Okay, so the recap. So we were talking yesterday that living together from awe is why we thrive, because awe brings us the gift of each other, and our type differences are part of the gift. And we talked about type, that there are psychological skills, for example, in looking at the world around us. Some people are very skilled at collecting facts. Others are more skilled at seeing how the facts might go together into a pattern. Well, it's kind of hard to do without either. mean, you need to have a pretty good command of facts, uh, and then you need to have a pretty good capacity to see how they might fit into patterns, because recognizing patterns in nature offers us a lot of powerful insight into how to manipulate nature to provide more food and other, necessities, so that we can sustain a larger population and live in more comfort. And so we need both skills, but typically nobody has both. The guy who's really good at facts is not so good at patterns, and the guy who's good at patterns is not so good at facts. I'm kind of crazy off the chart, skilled at intuition, at seeing how facts might go together into patterns. But as a result, when I walk through a room, I hardly notice anything other than living room, and my wife is rattling off a lot of small things that she noticed about the room that she likes or doesn't like. And truly, I didn't really see the facts. I hardly noticed that they had sofas or stuffed chairs or hard wooden chairs or rocking chairs. Or to me, it's just living room. I've categorized it and I'm done with it. And so psychological type difference means that in order for me to do well as a person in the community, in order for the community to thrive, we need to have people with a pretty highly developed sense of each of these psychological skills. I've just mentioned two. There's, five or six more. Depends upon what psychologist you talk to. There may be 10 or 12 more, but there's a bunch, and they're all of this type. So how you make judgments, you make decisions based on personal preferences or, or on the rules, very, very, hard and fast rules and that sort of thing. So the psychological type differences are psychological skill differences, and typically nobody has more than one in a highly developed form, and typically we need all of them in a highly developed form to thrive. So that's why we tend to live and work in groups, so that somebody in the group has got most of the skills are in a highly developed form in the one or two members of a group, and as a result, the group does better. And it relates to what we were the hunting skill that I'm going to talk about in a moment as a part of this recap. But let me just skip on for a minute. So the gift of each other means that our highest value is this most fundamental response to awe. That we turn towards each other in response to awe for comfort and support. And we want to know if the other guy has in him the same experience of all that we do in us at the core of our being. And over time, living and working together where there's consequences and difficulties to be faced, we figure out from the behavior that the guy probably has the same, stuff deep in them that we have deep in us. And so it further cements how much we are a gift to each other and increases the comfort and security level of our living in relation to each other. So this is a very high value then. It's higher than a particular value like liberalism or conservatism, kindness and gentleness versus harshness. And in both, all of those things are examples of how you interpret that the gift of each other is to be lived. So you think that if I don't treat my kids pretty harshly, they won't discover a lot of capacities in themselves that only show up when you need them. And so I got to make them need them so they'll know, oh, I got this stuff in me I didn't realize. I can handle more than I thought. Look at that. And there's other people that think that can be pushed way too far, or way too easily, and that it's much better to pour on the love and let the kids get born unto themselves by being loved, and then the in due time nature will give them enough challenges that they will discover their gifts. But those are honest differences of opinion as to how best to live the gift of each other. And when we realize that what we all really want to do, our highest value, is live the gift of each other, then we forgive and put in secondary status the very different interpretations that other people make of how best to go about this. So our whole, my whole reason, my whole main point about these podcasts is we want to change the world. And the way to do that is to change your life. And the way to do that is so that we can recreate the middle and lead people from the extremes back towards the middle so that there's more of a fruitful relation with each other. So this is a really critical point. If you see that the gift of each other is a higher value than the shared values of how you parent, or whether individual or community is more important, or what sexual behavior rules there are or aren't, then you are able to occupy the middle and welcome all persons, even with extreme interpretations of what it means to live the gift of each other. Because your highest value is you want to be in fruitful relation to those people, in spite of their differences in interpretive values. Um, so the you would you have to welcome everyone into the center, um, by pointing out that it's them that you value, and you may well not at all agree with their interpretations of how one best lives in the center, lives in the middle, and there will be, of course, some who refuse the call. The all calls us to live, to turn to each other, and to live in relation to each other, in fruitful relation. But there are some who, refuse awe and refuse the call towards each other. And if that weren't true, then the call would have no value. You're responding to the call. You're living in fruitful relation to other people. You're accepting the gift of each other and using it and participating in it. It would have no moral value unless it were possible for you to turn away. So it's normal to see that more than a few, more than a tiny percent, turns away. Um, and it's distressing, but we have to keep in mind that if nobody turned away, we'd all be like robots. If we couldn't, if the call was a command that we couldn't refuse, then we'd be like programmed. And then our decision to live the gift of each other would be meaningless because we wouldn't have any other choice. So you want to have meaning to your life, then there have to be people that are filled with hate and that refuse the gift of each other, turn away from awe and disgust. And that raises all kinds of other religious and philosophical questions that we can deal with, at Popcast 100 and such. We got a lot of other stuff to cover before we get into that kind of thing. But that seems to be the case, and it's to be kept in mind. The gift of each other is pretty hard to live, but it is the highest value, and it does involve some people refusing it. One of the things we talked about in prior podcasts that I want to recap is the book by Schneider called Rediscovery of Awe. And he talked about how awe is a mix of fear and wonder, and that you have to hold them both together. That you lose richness and vitality and stability if you don't hold them both together. you apparently, what he means is you don't forget either part of awe, and 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 in he was anxious to create a child psychology that involved not shielding the child from this reality of the world, that there's fear and wonder in awe, and instead helping the child encounter fear and wonder in such a way uh, that the child could handle the encounter. And from the encounter, the child would grow in stability and vitality together. And Snyder talked about something called the fluid center psychology. He wanted to create a whole new psychology in the world based on uh, that our ambition would be that each person has a centeredness, a strong, stable sense of self, but also openness, and so that they were fluid and they could learn and experience without, being afraid of being broken. And and then he talked about creating a global ethic, and he had some, very good ideas. So we talked about Bowlby already and attachment theory and Freud Jung. So Deacon, we talked about Deacon's book for quite a bit, and we covered a lot of things. Importantly, I want to um, talk about it. The Deacon sees that the birth of our characteristic as humans today occurred 2 to 2.5 million years ago. And 2.5 million years ago, there was an ancestor species called Australopithecus, and they had chimpanzee-sized brains, um, but had grown a little bit more capacity intellectually and were able to figure out how to use stone tools to butcher animals that they killed by hunting together, and then bring the butchered food back to the camp and share it with women and children. And the food meat is very rich in protein, and it made for more body health in the women and children. And it meant that more children would live long enough to begin procreating, etc., so that the community was thriving. And that involved, first, they were working together to hunt, and they had to learn how to live socially in order to do that. So they gathered together socially, and they lived together socially. And then, because of the increased hunting skill that this increased brain power gave, even though their brain was still chimpanzee size, it had gone through some changes that allowed the stone tool and the butchering of the meat and what's called provisioning, that the males were able to provision the females. Of course, the males didn't bring the females with them on the hunt because with little children, you wouldn't be as successful at moving fast enough and long enough and quietly enough to have good success with the hunting. So the stone tools allow them to leave the women behind and go out and acquire meat and bring it back. Um, and so that changed everything. And that's Deacon's point. Everything changed from that event, that they began at the same time to live in bonded pairs because Deacon gives a reason, I have a different reason. Nonetheless, the effect was uh, that men and women stopped living in a situation where there wasn't bonding. There was just, sex among the members of the community, and began living in a situation where a man and a woman made a bond with each other, and the community accepted and supported that bond. And so each gave up having sex with a variety of others in return for the strength that this bond permitted. And Deacon's explanation for why that is that the men wanted to be sure that the children they were provisioning were their own children. And I don't see how they would have known that. I mean, there's the act of sex, and then there's the fact of women bearing children. But just because one thing and another thing both happen, it doesn't mean that one causes the other. How they would know that at that stage, I don't know. And I'm inclined to think that they didn't. So, what would be another explanation? I'm offering the explanation that what happened was they began the rudimentary form of psychology, and that psychology included enough awe to want them to have intimacy with sex, and it's it is a physically intimate act, and emotions developed with this growing rudimentary psychology, and including the emotion of wanting intimacy with this physically intimate act, wanting emotional intimacy. So, regardless, I prefer my explanation to his. It's kinder and gentler, and I think it's truer. And certainly, we see now that there's intimacy with sex. It happened at some time that this notion of linking those two things developed. And I think it was at the beginning and was part of the cause. But the point that Deacon is making is that this was a huge and dramatic and very large scale change. The adding social together with the extra prowess in hunting, bringing the meat, and then adding bonded pairs so that the provisioning of the meat was done by the male in each couple, caused them to need to develop the capacity to use symbols, because there's an inherent conflict between living in bonded pairs and living socially. When men and women are social with each other, it's much easier to be tempted to break the bond. But there's benefits to both. The social living is what brought the social hunting, which brings the great results of all this extra meat, and other benefits, a richness of benefits. And there's a big benefit to the bond. It gives the children better resources and more securely so, and brings both parents involved into the relation with the young instead of just the mother. And there's huge benefits, but those things are in conflict. And the way they successfully dealt with the conflict was to invent this symbolic communication, and to do that caused them to start an evolutionary loop that changed the brain enormously. They had to evolve the capacity for speech in order to support the symbolic. And as they became more complicated, the psychology developed and became more complicated, then there was a continuous loop that complexity breeds complexity. If you need to become more complex to deal with more complex individuals in relation to each other, as you succeed in evolving a larger brain with more complicated psychology, you increase your problems, and the process has got to continue. So here we are today with pretty large brains, pretty complicated psychology, and we're still struggling to deal with all of this symbols in our lives, including this very, very powerful central symbol of marriage, and the related issues about sexual behavior in children, which have a huge amount to do with the modern divide. Enough for today. Wish me luck tomorrow, and I will see you Monday, hopefully refreshed and encouraged. Take care. Bye-bye.